Hi everyone, I'm Jack, a radiology trainee in London. The location where you do your specialty training is potentially one of the most important decisions you'll make in your life. That's because the place you do your specialty training tends to be where you apply to work as a consultant long term. In this video, I'll explain a bit about how the ranking on Oriel works, the 6 factors to consider when deciding where to rank your training schemes, and finally some sources of information to find out more about each of the schemes. These tips are mainly focused on radiology specialty training in the UK, but the principles do apply to the other specialties. So let's go. After completing the MSRA portfolio and interview for your radiology application, your scores will be added up and you'll be given a rank in the country. You'll then be asked to rank the training schemes in order of preference. Then, to decide who gets which training scheme, the current system is that whoever ranked first place would get their first choice training scheme. Whoever ranked second place would get their first choice if it hadn't already been chosen. This continues as we go through the rankings. That means that when you're doing your rankings, it's really important to not try to game the system. If you rank a location higher, it doesn't improve your chances of getting that location. It all depends on your application ranking. So make sure you rank the places you actually want to go to at the top. If you didn't rank high enough to secure a training position, you then get added to the reserve list. So if a new training scheme space opens up, you may be invited later to take it up. When the offers get sent out, you only typically have about 48 hours to respond to the offer. If you miss that window, the offer then gets passed to someone else. So you have to check your email quite regularly during the offer period. When responding to the offers, you're given the option to either accept, hold, or reject the offer. And with the accept or hold options, you can either opt into upgrades or choose not to have the option of upgrades. If you accept an offer on a training scheme, that means that that place is yours. And if you do nothing else, you're then basically guaranteed to start your radiology training there. If you choose to hold, that space is reserved for you until something called the hold deadline. After that hold deadline, you then have to commit to either accepting or rejecting it. The next interesting part of this system is the upgrade system. So if you accept with upgrades or hold with upgrades, that means if somebody who ranked higher than you rejects a training scheme post that you had ranked as a higher preference, you'll be offered that training scheme post so that you can be upgraded to somewhere that you preferred to be. This can happen multiple times during the offer period. For most people applying, it's usually a good idea to opt in for upgrades because, believe it or not, people do reject their radiology offers, and that means that you can get a place that you ranked higher. The last option is to reject your offer. That basically withdraws your application and you can no longer be upgraded or offered any new offers for radiology in the application period. On that note, it's really important that you only rank training schemes that you would actually accept. That's because if you get offered a place that you wouldn't actually work and you reject it, you wouldn't be eligible to have any upgrades into a place that you actually wanted to work because you've now withdrawn your application. Every year after the offer period, new training post spaces get created. This can be for a variety of reasons, which include either funding or other people dropping out later. But the key is, it's okay if you're on the reserve list because you'll still be eligible to be upgraded if one of these other offers becomes available. Now let's talk about the 6 factors to consider when ranking your training schemes. For this section, I highly recommend grabbing a paper and a pen and writing down the factors that are important to you when choosing a training scheme. That's because this is a really personal process, and what applied to me may not apply to your situation. So the first thing to consider is your support network. I've put this first because I honestly believe this is the most important factor. Specialty training and life in general is challenging, but what will really pull you through is having friends and family nearby. I've made my own mistakes in the past in moving to training locations far from family and friends, and honestly that was one of the biggest contributors to me burning out. The second factor to consider is your professional network. Essentially it can include where you went to medical school, for example, or if you did any extra degrees, the location where you did those. And it makes it more enjoyable as a place to work if you have lots of familiar faces around. If you've done some form of academic work before, then it means that you're still close to your academic network, so if you wanted to do future projects, you can always access that. The third factor is convenience. That can mean picking a location where the main hospital is quite accessible, either by public transport or by car. It also means thinking about how spread out the hospitals in the deanery are and how big the deanery is. That's because that can influence whether you'll need to be able to drive and even whether you'll need to move halfway during your training. The fourth factor is the subspecialties that your teaching hospital has. After the first 3 years of your core radiology training, the final 2 years of your specialty training are your fellowship years, where you gain subspecialty experience. If you have an idea of what sort of subspecialties you might want to do before you even start radiology training, then it's worth picking a training scheme that has strengths in those subspecialties. One example is that if you want to do interventional radiology, you probably want to be working somewhere with a trauma centre and with vascular services. If the base hospital for your training scheme doesn't have the subspecialty you may want to do, then you usually have to apply for some form of interdeanery transfer for your fellowship years, and that may mean that you have to move location as well. The fifth factor to consider is whether you'd like to train in an academy or a traditional hospital-based training scheme. There's a big difference in teaching style between academies and hospital-based schemes. In academies, you get more structured teaching, especially in the earlier years, and these are focused on getting you to pass your exams and learn the basic skills of radiology in a perhaps less hectic environment than a hospital. But the only consideration is that only certain areas have academies, so it's worth looking up what those locations are. The sixth factor to consider is the on-calls. I don't think this should necessarily be the most important factor, because most trainees do on-calls. However, in some training schemes, the trainees don't do residential night shifts, and that could influence why you may preference one over the other. Okay, now that you have a list of factors of things that are important for you, the next step is to find out about each of the training schemes. By far the best resource I've encountered is the British Institute of Radiology's Guide to Radiology Training Programmes. This is essentially a document that talks about every training scheme in the UK and includes which hospitals you can be sent to, which subspecialties are good there, what each year is like, and finally what the on-calls are like. To access the document, you need to sign up to the British Institute of Radiology, and that's what I did when I was applying, not only for the document, but also for the radiology application courses. They're not sponsoring this video, by the way, but that document is excellent. The next extremely valuable resource is the GMC National Training Survey. This is a survey that every trainee has to complete, and using this, you can look up the hospital and the specialty and see how trainees rate it for things like workloads, teaching, and lots of other factors. The final way to learn how a training scheme is currently is just to talk to the registrars. If you're working in a hospital that you're interested in, you can just go to the radiology department and talk to some people. The other good opportunity is on your taster week. Another place, I suppose, is in conferences. Now you have a list of your important factors for ranking training schemes, and you have your resource about the training schemes. You can then make your shortlist and put your ranking on Oriel. Remember, only rank the places that you would actually accept, and when the offers start coming out, make sure you check your email at least daily. To see what starting radiology ST1 is like, check out my other video. Good luck to you all, and I'll see you next time.